Good evening and welcome to downtown Chagrin Falls, Ohio. I'm Karen Prosser and I'm the Executive Director of Chagrin Arts. And you are a part of our gallery this evening, the Joan P. Wenck Gallery. And we are featuring an exhibit that is called Freedom of Expression, Giving Voice to Victims of Wrongful Conviction. We are so pleased and so excited to be a part of this project and thank the Innocence Network and Kate Murray for inviting us to participate in this day-long commemoration of wrongful conviction. Our partners in this project are the Ohio Innocence Project, John Carroll University, and our exhibit today is also supported by the Ohio Arts Council. A lot of our work over the next couple of years and in the past probably year and a half has been dedicated to arts with a purpose in various projects with the Ohio Innocence Project. And we couldn't be more excited about really taking arts to another level. And that is talking about the healing powers of visual arts and music. And we are so extremely pleased to be a part of this extraordinary day. Later on, you will meet Jennifer Thompson. And I just wanted to bring to your attention that we are doing a virtual book club with her. She will talk about her book a little bit, Picking Cotton, and we will do a virtual book club on Tuesday, October 20th at 7 p.m. with Fireside Bookstore, a local bookstore down the street. And for more information about that, you can go to chagrinarts.org, and it will tell you everything more that you need to know to be a part of that exciting event. There will be question and answers, a time after Jennifer to ask her questions. And Dr. Schivoni from John Carroll will be leading the question and answers. And we have a live audience here, socially distant, with masks on. And they will also be invited to ask questions. So you have papers and pencils, and all you have to do is raise your hand, and one of us will come around and pick up your questions so that we can have Jennifer answer for you. Healing Justice, Katie Monroe, and Jennifer Thompson have been incredible to work with, and this art is part of their heart. And to be here and to be amongst this artwork is quite an honor to get to know these people who are now a presence here in our gallery. So question and answers, I think I've taken care of everything. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you a gentleman who has become not only my colleague in all of the new programming that Chagrin Arts is doing, but a dear friend who has really changed my life and who has brought so much education and joy in meeting these people who have been wrongly incarcerated as part of Chagrin Arts and the work that we do here in Northeast Ohio. So without further ado, I would like to turn the program over to my dear friend, Pierce Reed, who is from the Ohio Innocence Project. Pierce.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Karen's a tough act to follow, but we are so thankful to have this opportunity to be back working with John Carroll and Chagrin Arts. To all of you who are part of this organization, a very sincere thank you. It means not just a lot to me, but to our board members, and most of all, to our clients. They love that you have opened your arms to them, to understanding what's happened to them, but also to recognizing that they are so much more than the past which they have lived through. We commemorate International Wrongful Conviction Day today for two reasons. Part of it is solemn and somber. We always talk a little bit about numbers, but when I say a number, I want you to recognize that that number represents human life. So I checked just before we started that we know of in America, there have been 2,674 people exonerated from crimes they did not commit. Each one of those people has a mother and a father, they have children, they have brothers. So you have to understand that the number is not just a life, but it impacts all kinds of lives. And as much as we have to recognize what they've been through, we also have International Wrongful Conviction Day to celebrate the triumph of those people. I'm very fortunate throughout my life as a lawyer to have met some really remarkable people, but none have been more remarkable than the clients with which we work. They truly are heroes and heroines. And when you have a chance to look at the gallery, whether it's here or online, you will see some of the family members and our clients depicted. But please make sure when you look at the art, you look at the stories behind it as well. Today, before I came over, I had lunch and I got a fortune cookie. And a lot of times I don't even bother reading the fortune because half the time it doesn't come true and then I'm just disappointed. But today mine said, a brave man is one that is not afraid to admit his mistake. And it struck me because this program was on my mind at the time. And one of the things that we have to be mindful of is that these are mistakes. Wrongful convictions occur because we're human. But none of us like to admit that we've made a mistake. And sometimes that probably doesn't matter. You burn a plate of cookies, the world doesn't end. But when we make a mistake that impacts someone's life by wrongful conviction, it has huge consequences. And I have to say that there are not enough men and women who wear robes or lead prosecutors' offices who are those brave people that will admit they made a mistake. One of the harms that flows from that are to people who are our clients. But one of the other harms that flows from that are to the victims of the crime that gave rise to the wrongful conviction. And even within the innocence movement, we don't talk about that enough. One of the things that happens for the victim on the day that we're celebrating someone coming home is that a police officer or a deputy or a prosecuting attorney is telling that person there's been a mistake. That mistake may not have been uncovered until 10, 15, 20 years later. And as a practical matter, what that means all too often is that there can't be another prosecution. But that victim doesn't get the attention that he or she deserves. They are forgotten, they are ignored, they are silenced, and in some cases, they are blamed. We don't blame the system. We don't blame ourselves. We blame them. And that is a whole level of trauma that none of them should have to endure on top of what they've already endured. And being mindful of that is part of why we wanted to do this collaboration with Healing Justice. It is one of the few organizations that devotes itself to all victims of wrongful conviction, including the victims of the original crimes. The work that you see on the walls is just one small sample of the power that they have to help transform those people's lives. It is a remarkable organization. As Karen mentioned, it's led by Katie Monroe, who is an incredible director, and it was founded by Jennifer Thompson, who now continues to lead it from the board of directors. Jennifer is somebody that means the world to all of us at OIP and throughout the network, and we are so proud that we can introduce you to her tonight. She is the author of Picking Cotton, which tells her story as a survivor of rape, the story of the man who was wrongfully convicted, and it is because of her great vision and her great dedication that all of this is possible. So please join me in welcoming Jennifer Thompson.
Appreciate that introduction. And Karen, thank you so much for hosting our beautiful art. It's nice to be able to have seen it for just a moment hanging on the walls of Chagrin Arts. And thank you, of course, to the Ohio Innocence Project, who's asked us to partner with them on this collaboration. It's truly an honor. It's always an honor. Innocence projects out there, but Mark Godsey and his terrific team is, really such leaders in the wrongful conviction movement. So I want to spend just a few minutes kind of telling you the backstory. I don't want to spend too long on my story personally, but to give it context, in 1984, I was a 22-year-old college student, and on July 29th of that night, a stranger broke into my apartment while I was sleeping and woke me up with a knife to my throat and continued to brutally rape me. Throughout the assault, I tried to pay attention to the features of his face, hoping that I would survive and be able to help the police apprehend this person. After the assault, I was able to escape. I ran to a neighbor's house and they opened the door and saved me. And at that point, they called the police. And of course, I was taken to the hospital to have a rape kit done. And it was at the hospital, having the rape kit performed, I learned that the man who assaulted me, the rapist, had left my in an hour, had gone on to rape and beat another woman who happened to be much older than me. And I could hear her crying down the hall in the hospital. So, of course, I was very committed to finding this person. He was a serial rapist. He was going to hurt other people. And I was committed to making the streets of Burlington, North Carolina safe again. Through a composite sketch, a suspect was notified. His name was Ronald Cotton. 3 days after the assault, I was called to the police station where I would look through a series of photographs, and I was able to pick out the person who I believed had assaulted me, and it indeed was Ronald Cotton. And at that point, I was told, after I picked out his photograph, good job, that's who we thought it was. 10 days after the rape, I was called back down to the police station to look at a physical lineup, and once again, I was able to pick out that was the same person that you picked out in the photograph. So, of course, the relief was overwhelming, and the next step was to go to court. So in January of 1985, after 2 weeks of the trial and testifying and 2.5 days of my own, having to recount graphic details about what he had done to me, Ronald Cotton was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in 54 years. And then you're told now you can move on and put your life back together again, but there's nothing to put back together again. So I tried to recover. I fell in love with a new man. I got a job. I began working, and the state of North Carolina overturned the decision, and we had to go back to court. This time, however, we tried both cases. And this time, Ronald Cotton would be found guilty of 2 rapes and would be sentenced to 2 life sentences. And once again, you try to put your life over again. And every time your life is shredded and ripped apart, there's, of course, less and less pieces of you to find to put back together again. I was able to get married. I had children. And in the spring of 1990, I gave birth to triplets. And that gave me my task and my job to have something to do, a reason to not die, a reason to have to get up in the morning, a reason to have to live. And I was good at it. I enjoyed that job. It was everything to me. In 1995, however, the police officer from the original case came to my home and told me about this technique called post-conviction DNA testing. And I, of course, wanted the test to be run because I knew my truth and I wanted this to be over. I didn't want to continue to have to deal with this. So I gave them a new blood sample because my blood sample from the rape kit had disintegrated 11 years later. And 3 months later, after I gave them the blood, they came back to my home and stood in my kitchen and told me not only had it not been Ronald Cotton who had committed both of the rapes, it had indeed been a serial rapist by the name of Bobby Poole. And I have no words to actually describe that moment. It felt like the earth opened up and a big black hole swallowed me. And it's different this time because Ronald would be walking out of prison on June 30th, 1995. and my life became a disaster. I became very small. I didn't want the world to find me. And so I erased myself from the universe. However, 2 years after Ronald came out, I wasn't functioning very well. So I asked for a meeting in a church not far from where I'd been raped to meet this man. And it was at that church, 13 years after the assault, that I was able to look at Ronald in the face and tell him how sorry I was for what had happened to him. And Ronald cried and I cried, and he looked at me and said, "I'm not angry at you. It's not your fault. It was Bobby Poole's fault. Bobby Poole had committed a terrible crime to many, many women in the community. He'd gone on to be free for another 9 months. He had assaulted other women. He had committed 24 other crimes, 6 of which were first-degree rapes. And we knew that not only had Ronald been hurt, but I had been hurt, and Ronald's family had been hurt, and my family had been hurt, but the entire community of Burlington, North Carolina, had been traumatized and had been led to think that the system had worked when indeed the system had failed. The next 15 years would take over my life as I began to be a public speaker and advocate for system changes, particularly around eyewitness ID. And in those years, I would spend a great deal of time listening to stories of exonerees and what had happened to them, and crime victims and what had happened to them and their families, and what had happened to the mothers and the children and the siblings. And I began to collect these stories, and I kept thinking to myself, why isn't there a place for us in the aftercare world? Why isn't someone stepping forward and trying to create a space for us to come together and share stories? So in 2014, I worked with a man named David Onick, who at that time was the director of the Northern California Innocence Project, to create the first retreat for together 5 exonerees and 3 victims. And we sat in space for 2.5 days and talked about the harm, the grief, the losses. And at that moment, we knew that we had hit on something, that this was really special, that this was indeed possible, that it was possible to create spaces that were safe for everyone to come together and share their stories. In 2015, Ronald and I were given the Special Courage Award from the Department of Justice, and I decided that that would be the time as Katie Monroe, probably one of the most brilliant women on the planet, to join me and become the executive director. Katie is the daughter of an exoneree, so I knew that she understood. I knew that she understood the harm, the pain, the grief. And so we began to launch Healing Justice and create this space for crime survivors, for exonerees, for family members. In 2017, we were awarded a grant from the Department of Justice to do the first ever comprehensive project on original crime victims' voices and what happened to those folks. And the first thing we decided to do was bring them together to Washington, D.C. to have a listening session, to allow their voices to be listened to be heard. And one of the things that came out of it, I would like to invite you to listen to some of the voices of original crime survivors now. Hopefully.
Almost 15 years later, they matched his DNA with the mask that the perpetrator wore, but it didn't matter. So he appealed, and the verdict was overturned.
They had to release him 3 days before my daughter was born, my miracle baby of a daughter. Sucked the joy of it all of my life. I didn't even go to my hospital because I'm so angry I can't even hold it out without the joy. It took me a long time to find it. That's terrible to say.
How should we feel? How do you deal with it? There's no help in our family. And the other thing was, Yours truly certainly needed that.
When he had gotten exonerated, they didn't even come and let me know. I lived a mile away from the courthouse.
I didn't even know what exoneration was, what that meant. Nobody explained it to me. If he gets out, then he can, what if he's mad? If he's mad and he's mad at my family, he might come and retaliate against all of us.
And, for me, then I had to put up my guard because I don't know how he felt, especially when a man has been convicted of a murder that he didn't commit,
If he didn't do it, then who did? And so now I'm confused all over again, because then what happens to my mother's case? What happens now? Do we forget about her because now he's out? What happens to her? It's not fair.
After the exoneration, I truly needed counseling. I did. I was a mess. I had anxiety. There was fear because I, like his family and him, was in the spotlight because I agreed that he was innocent. And I was adamant after the exoneration, we need to find out who murdered my sister. So I was a voice for that too. And then I started having medical issues. And 6 months of testing, of medication, and we don't know what's wrong with you.
You have anxiety like you wouldn't believe. It's on your shoulders day after day after day. My sons didn't know. They learned later. I was so depressed that I completely shut down.
As a victim, as a survivor, as a family member, what do you need going forward to continue your healing?
Shortly after the exoneration, the Wisconsin Innocence Project gave me Jennifer Thompson's name. This is a rape survivor who has gone through something very similar to you. If you had scripted something for a support person to say to a survivor of an exoneration, you could not have written a script that was more helpful than what Jennifer said to me. And I remember hanging up that phone and feeling human for the first time since I had learned of my misidentification.
When I met Miss Jennifer in face, person to person, she hugged me, and that was really honestly the first time that I was able to just breathe and exhale. She just held me, let me know it was okay, and I was going to get through it.
The opportunity to actually meet face to face other survivors was just an incredible feeling. To sit in a very safe environment and share your feelings about things that had happened and how you dealt with them, and so common in everybody's story that you just go, oh, me too, me too.
Please reach out to Healing Justice, because we're here for you and we want to be here for you, and we'll wrap you around with support, and you will never, ever walk this alone.
Videos. So I want to invite you to go onto our website, which you will see at the very end of this. There is a link, and you can see the full videos of both groups that we've worked with, which are our rape survivors and those family members of murder victims. They're quite beautiful. It was the first time many of these folks had ever been able to actually talk about the experiences.
I was stationed in Germany in the Army, and I received a phone call from a family friend letting me know that I think the first thing she said were,
Caitlin, if you can go ahead and give me the second slide. One of the things that came after the listening session was the questions that we had asked folks. We were able to create some word clouds. And I think what's important about this slide for people to look at is these are all experiences. And you see that one of the what the impact of the post-conviction case on the folks and their families, the large traumatized, anxiety, anger, fear, depression. Who helped you before, during, and after the exoneration? Nobody. You know, one of the things that people tend to think is that crime victims have all the support during the actual investigation, during the trial, and post-exoneration. And the crime victims that we've worked with, that I could tell you, including myself, the answer comes back without exception that no one was there. Most of our crime victims find out about the exoneration either late or they find out about it through the newspaper, or a family member calls them on the phone and says, turn on the television. And two of the sisters that we are working with, they found out about the exoneration 10 years after the person who they thought had murdered their father was exonerated. 10 years later, no one bothered to tell them. No one bothered to call them. Therapy. They need to feel safe. They need peer support. And what did you need at the time? Same thing. They needed empathy. They needed information. They needed truth. They needed someone to tell them the truth. And particularly folks that are murder victim family members, they need to know that the case is still going to be looked at, that it's now going to be turned into a cold case. Who killed their child? Who killed their spouse? Who killed their parent? They need to know these things. Can I see the second slide? This is a slide that we like to use a lot, that we've talked about concentric circles of harm. Again, this is one of the things that is this all harmed approach in trying to create equity in the voices of the harm caused by wrongful conviction. And at the center of the concentric circles of harm, of course, is the perpetrator. It's the person who started everything. In my case, it was Bobby Poole. Ronald Cotton could never have been wrongfully convicted if Bobby Poole hadn't raped me and raped a second woman. But all of the figures that you see around the concentric circles of harm are also people who get hurt, right? The original victims, I believe that judges and juries and police officers get hurt. Mike Galden, who was the original investigator, will tell you it was the worst day of his career. And not only was it the worst day of his career, but he went back to the police department and passed best practices as far as eyewitness identification went, and then went on to lead the state of North Carolina in being a leader in changing the way eyewitness evidence is collected and preserved. Other witnesses get hurt. We know that jurors get hurt. Jurors, and I just can't imagine what it was like for them to open up the newspaper on the day that Ronald was exonerated and know that they had participated in a criminal justice miscarriage. And then families and loved ones, of course, are terribly hurt. But we also forget about subsequent victims and survivors, about the women, and in my case, and their families. They got hurt because we left a guilty person on the street. So again, at Healing Justice, we do take an all-harmed approach and talk about everyone who gets harmed when the criminal justice system fails. Next slide, please. These are some of the programs that Healing Justice works on. We have peer support and resources. We have trainings for our peer support folks, rape survivors supporting other rape survivors, exonerees supporting exonerees, mothers supporting other mothers. We also have individual services such as helping people find the things that they need in order to recover. We host listening sessions, helping people to listen to the voices of those that have been impacted and harmed, training and technical assistance with district attorneys' offices, judges, police, victims advocates, and of course the cornerstone program that we have at Healing Justice are our retreats. We've hosted 14 in-person retreats and 24 virtual circles online during the pandemic. We bring folks together that have been harmed by a wrongful conviction, and we pay for them to come, so there's no cost to our exonerees and our victims and their family members. Next slide, please. This is a photograph of one of our retreats that we hosted. In this photograph, you're going to see a collection of exonerees and their families. You're going to see crime victims and their families, and other folks who support us and help us along the way. Wonderful and magical, to be honest with you. Those folks that have participated in retreats walk away truly changed, and they often say that it's the best therapy they've had since either the exoneration or the crime. Next slide, please. We created this resource guide. It is online at our website. This was led by folks that have been harmed, our exonerees, and this is a guide for folks returning after a post-conviction exoneration and their family members, by folks that we work with. So if you look at it, you'll see everything that we collect, experienced it, who have survived it. It is free to download on our website. We're very proud of it. And so hopefully it'll be of use to the network going forward. Next, please. These are some photographs from the retreat. On your left is one of our crime survivors. She was 12 years old when she was sexually assaulted, much like myself, asleep in her bedroom. This is the mask that she created, and she often talks about that coming to the retreats was the way that she was able to finally stop an addiction, and she is now 4 years free of the use of painkillers. In the middle, you'll see a photograph of an exoneree out of Virginia, and on the right is something we do called a letting go ceremony, where we invite people to write down the things that they're ready to let go of and release, and we burn them, we let them go. And it's pretty magical when folks in their trauma. Next, please. This is our contact information. We invite you all to contact us to look at the resources that we have. And one of the things I guess I really want to say to the folks out there listening tonight is there's no crime survivor, no victim of a crime that wants an innocent person to go to prison. They all want the guilty person, the person who harmed their families, the person who harmed their bodies, to go to prison. And at Healing Justice, I think one of the things we've gotten really good at is being able to create a safe and nurturing space for people to come together, to share their stories, to lean into each other's harms, to witness each other's pain and grief, and create an environment where crime survivors can all feel supported and all feel like they've been listened to and begin to work their way back to healing. So I want to thank you again for listening tonight. I want to thank Chagrin Arts. I want to thank Ohio Innocence Project, and of course, Innocence Network for allowing us to be part of International Wrongful Conviction Day. So I think we'll take questions. wait for Pierce.
Jennifer, first of all, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your story and the story of healing justice. It's just so powerful to be in this room with the artwork and listening to the story. So nearly 35 years have passed since the crime that set your life on a different course. And I'm just wondering, we know that time cannot heal all wounds, so I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about how you are and how you're doing these days.
I mean, so there's two answers to that question, to be honest with you. One is, I think I'm doing well. Healing justice, of course, has given me a task and a job and a way to use my passion and my pain that is healing and forward thinking. But I think the other part of that answer is, if I stop for too long and if I get really quiet by myself, it's pretty painful. I'm 58 years old, and the crime happened when I was 22 years old. And I will tell you, in those years, that not a single person in my family has ever asked me about what happened to me. And so in many cases, like myself, particularly as a rape survivor, the pain is still really intense, and it's still very much present in my life. But I think that is what drives me, to be honest with you, is to continue helping others. Self. Do you have another question, Sarah?
So as I said, being in this gallery, I was struck by the masking project, I think because so many of us are now wearing masks and thinking about the role of masks in our lives. So I was on the website, and the masking project is described as an expressive arts project where participants create physical representations of the mask that they built to bury their pain and protect themselves from harm. You go on to say that creating these physical masks is a safe way for those who have been harmed to express their pain, but also find their freedom when they remove them. I just felt that was so powerful, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about this masking project.
I mean, the masking project, when people come to the retreat, that's the first project they'll actually do, is the mask project. And so we invite people to artistically express through colors and words and materials, what is the mask you hide behind? What is the mask that you protect the world from, right? What is the mask that you protect yourself from? And sometimes people's mask, their true mask is on the inside, and what they show the world is on the outside. But oftentimes I think we live in our mask for so long that they become part of us, and we don't realize that we have permission to take those masks off and take a look at what we're hiding behind, and kind of like unarmor ourselves. To begin to peel back those layers of, for many people, a mask they've been wearing for decades, particularly people who have been exonerated. Folks have to wear a mask in prison to stay safe. Crime survivors have to wear a mask that I'm okay. And family members wear masks often. Their families or the community is judging them. And so we all wear masks. All of us do. It is what that is. What is it that you're hiding behind? What is it you're ready to take off? And so part of our art projects, the important part is not just creating it, but to be able to describe it for yourself. It's very therapeutic for the artist to be able to depict and talk about what it is that they did. And many of our folks will say that bringing their art project home and putting it in their home has allowed their visitors and their family members, when they come in, to look at, what is this? Tell me more about your project. And it's a way of allowing communication between family members and friends that often are a little bit weary about asking pointed questions. These art projects allow them to talk about it in a way that's safe. Do you have another question, Tara?
So I think we have a follow-up question from the audience. So I'm not sure how we would, do you want to, Gavin, can we do that?
Hi, thank you so much. I think you have raised in me at least, and many, how do we disarm ourselves? Because our armor keeps us from doing what we could do. And what you're helping us with is to say, your story is not just your story. It is your story, but we also have to I sit here and say, and what might we do and say, this isn't a time to sit still and listen, but to do. And so I ask for your guidance in those words.
That's a really tall order of a question. I think, well, first of all, let me tell you that I do think listening is the beginning. I do believe that we're all called to listen to each other. Rumi has an expression, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit here, but he says, somewhere between the right doing and the wrong doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. And I think for particularly when we think about wrongful convictions, you know, the criminal justice system, one of the reasons why I believe it's such a mess and it makes so many mistakes is because it's adversarial in nature. It takes, you know, the defense and the prosecutors and they're fighting and it's all a matter of who's going to win the fight, who's going to win the game. And unfortunately, in wrongful convictions, in stories, we've kind of brought that same mindset into wrong of I can either care about the exoneree or I can care about the crime victim. And I believe in wrongful convictions, it does not need to be, and it shouldn't be an either or. That wrongful convictions and the narratives and the true stories of wrongful convictions require an and. So how do we care about everybody who's been impacted? And I believe that the way we care about everyone that's been impacted is to begin by listening to stories. Stories change the way we feel about social injustice. And so the first task, I believe, is sitting with each other in a place that's safe. That's what we do at Healing Justice, and allow people to begin to unfold. Allow people to be able to honor each other's journey, to validate each other's experiences, to witness each other's grief and trauma. It's one of the beautiful things about our retreats. It's one of the beautiful things about our listening sessions is creating spaces for people to hear the stories. And so, again, I mean, I think as you go forward, as we all go forward, I think one of the things we're required to do is to first listen, really listen, not hear, but really sit in space and kind of expose your soul to what is it that is your call to do? Is it working with juveniles? Is it working with women? Is it working with second chances, with reentry? We're all called to do something, but before you can respond to your call, I do believe you're required to listen to stories first. Next question.
my next question. I'm a professor of political science, and I was talking with some of my students, and you're brainstorming all of the things that we would love to ask you, and we'd love to have you in a little coffee shop here in Cleveland, and we're sorry that we're in this virtual environment, but again, thank you for doing this. But that was really something that they picked up on, the role of stories, and the cornerstone of your restorative justice work at Healing Justice is the retreats, where you're able to share those stories. So we wondered if you could share one very powerful story to help us understand the power of those retreats.
Sarah, there's so many stories. And I told you one about one of our, crime survivors who was able to stop using, painkillers. It was remarkable. She's been 4 years free. But one of the other beautiful stories is one of the mothers from an exoneree came to our first retreat, and she did her mask and she did the letting go ceremony. And her son had been home for about 10 years at this point. And she had stayed in this really, really angry place, this very, very angry place at the system, at injustice, at the community that had turned their back on her family. And during the letting go ceremony, she wrote down on the sky lantern, she wanted to let go of past anger. She wanted to move on and move forward with her life. And so she went home, and her longtime boyfriend saw a physical change in her. I mean, like a change in her. And so it's because of the change, he proposed to her and asked her to marry him. And she agreed. So she came back to her second retreat. And at the second retreat, you do something called, and there's some of your portraits will show the shoe project, which is, if you had walked in my shoes, what would I want you to know about my journey? And so she created her shoe project as her centerpiece for her wedding. And there was a white shoe and a black shoe. And the black shoe was her past, what she was moving on from, and her white shoe was her future. And so she and her husband came back to a retreat, her third and his first, just recently before the pandemic. And they were like 25-year-olds having married for the first time, their joy and their happiness. And so, but we've got a lot of stories like that where people, come to the retreats. They're not really sure what they're getting themselves into. And it is difficult because you do sit in space and you do talk about the worst moments of your experiences, but you're also listening to other people's experiences, realizing that you're not alone, that there are people who have gone through it as well. And you create this justice family. And by the time folks leave, the only word we've been able to come up with that even closely resembles what happens at these retreats is magic. I mean, it's magic. People are able to let go of some of the past that you can't change, that there's nothing you can do about, but there is something we can do about tomorrow. And what do we want for our tomorrows? And how do we want to shift and move into the next place, which is going to be, what we call collective joy and collective gratitude and collective healing when you sit in space with other people who are healing with you. It's pretty remarkable.
So that actually segues into another question from our audience. They wondered if you could talk a little bit about the training and maybe the techniques used in restorative justice as you practice it. I think you were talking about the circles of care, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit on those practices.
To be truthful in a way that we have defined as transformative justice. Restorative justice really asks three questions. It's how were you harmed? What do you need? And whose obligation is it to fill that need? In wrongful convictions, of course, in true restorative justice, you would have a victim and an offender. But in wrongful convictions, the offender is either the perpetrator, who is often never discovered, or is the system that created the harm. And so generally what we think of as the offender to the harm isn't going to be present in our circles. So we use principles of restorative justice to get to the transformative justice. And so one of the questions we do ask is, how were you harmed? It's one of the big questions we use. Days, we spend a great deal of time about where the wounds were made. What does the grief look like? What do the losses in our lives look like? To be able to really open spaces for truth and for the pain to kind of be discovered, to talk about those moments that we've kind of put in a box and closed somewhere and put in the bottom of the ocean. So we use the restorative justice principles. Our art therapy and expressive art therapy is essential to our retreats. It's usually takes about 3 days to finish the projects. We also use improv games, and it is our final night when we play silly games, because we also know that for most of us, the joy in our lives got removed years and years ago. We stopped laughing, we stopped playing, and being able to kind of come back to your authentic child, that child that was broken so many years ago, and be able to laugh again at just being silly and playing is extremely healing. We use the letting go ceremony of things that we're ready to let go of. And then we also do something called a gratitude circle, where we express gratitude to each other, to the people in the circle that we've been spending the last. We invite folks to come back to as many retreats as they need to. It expands their family, it expands their peer support and their network, and it grows the Healing Justice family.
Thank you for explaining a little bit about that transformative justice process that you use. So can you talk a little bit about some of the reforms that you would like to see implemented within the criminal justice system that would help both the original crime victims and sort of prevent or alleviate some of the issues with wrongful convictions in the first place?
Well, gosh. Well, I mean, of course, there's a lot of reforms that the network is working on and has been working on for decades, from eyewitness identification reform to, collecting the audio and videotape to prevent false confessions. But I guess I would like to overhaul the entire system. I mean, to be honest with you, the system works exactly the way the system was designed. The system isn't necessarily a failure. It works the way it was designed 250, 300 years ago. The criminal justice system was never designed to work for poor people or people of color or people that are mentally ill or women. It was work for white male landowners. And so I think to be able to reform the system, we have to be truthful about the history of our system to begin with. And it works the way it was designed. So I think I actually don't want to fix the system. I want a new system that works for everyone and is fair. And a fair system would require truth and transparency above power and ego. So as far as reforming, perfectly honest, I don't think it works for brown and black people. I don't think it works for poor people. I don't think it works for mentally ill people. It works the way it was designed.
So I think all of us in this room are very touched by the stories that we've heard and the artwork that we are surrounded by. And we're wondering, how can we help amplify the voices of the original crime victims? How can we help get their stories a part of the overall story of wrongful convictions?
We have to create a safe space for them. It's just not been safe. They've been blamed. Rape survivors get blamed that somehow it was their fault, that they were asked to participate in a procedure that was designed to be flawed. We get blamed for even having the rape to begin with. I mean, I know in my case, the defense attorney during the first trial said to me, "Didn't you know that if you go to bed wearing just your underwear, you provoke rape?" So so part of it is making a space that's safe and talk about what happened to them. Our murder victim family members. I mean, how do we blame people for being murdered? So many of our folks that we've worked with, their sisters were narrated as Black drug addicted prostitutes. Their mothers were narrated as party girls. Their cousin was just began to change the language that we use surrounding crime victims. We need to stop victim blaming. We need to create a space where they feel like they can come forward, where their voices are heard, where they're not being erased out of the narrative of a wrongful conviction. I would venture to say very few people even know the names of crime victims from wrongful conviction cases. They're erased out of the story. So why would any crime victim want to come forward in a space that is not safe, in a space that they're going to be blamed? And to have a space for these folks, for our crime victims to come forward and say, yes, this happened to me. Yes, I want to talk about what happened to my family. Then we can begin to support them. But we can't support them if we can't find them. And we can't find them if we don't create a space that's safe.
I think those are so powerful. And thank you for sharing your observations. And I certainly agree that trying to take an all-harmed approach and including the original crime victims in the stories of wrongful conviction is definitely something that we should all be thinking of. And being in this space, I wish we could share the space with you, this beautiful gallery that hosts this beautiful artwork by everyone who's been touched by this social injustice. So thank you so much for sharing your story, Jennifer, and sharing this artwork with all of us.